Good evening, everyone. This is Jeff Simons, Superintendent of Schools for the East Greenbush Central School District, and on behalf of our district and our Board of Education, our administrative team, I would like to welcome you to our third community forum to discuss the school reopening plan. For the purposes of this evening's meeting, we have expanded our administrative panel so that we could address any number of questions that may come up during the process of the meeting. Additionally, we are changing the format a little bit to include less presentation. In fact, there will be no presentation other than the few words that I'm saying now, and the majority of the time will be reserved for questions that will be submitted through Thought Exchange. Additionally, we want to take the hour-and-a-half period that we have together and to break it into segments through the use of Thought Exchange. So the first period of questioning will be dedicated solely to questions that relate to the elementary school level. The second period, or the middle period, would be related to questions related to middle school, and the last period would be related to high school. So we're going to divide the meeting up into approximately third, so that each of those levels of parents have an opportunity to ask their questions, express their concerns, and we can respond to those questions in a more pertinent manner to the level at which they relate. Real quickly, as I go around the meeting to introduce our panel, providing technical support is Director of Technology, Peter Goodwin, who is behind the scenes making this work. Mark Adam, our Public Information Specialist, is here to also help us engage in the Thought Exchange. Assistant Superintendent for Curriculum and Instruction, Mr. McHugh, joins us again this evening. We are also joined by our Director of Pupil Personnel Services, Molly McGrath, who handles the oversight of our special education programs, our related services programs, and our nurses. We're joined by a distinguished panel of principals. Mr. Alvey is our principal at the Donald P. Sutherland Elementary School. Helen Squillace is our principal at the Red Mill Elementary School. Wayne Grignon is the principal at the Janae Elementary School. So we have three elementary principals on the panel this evening with a range of different size schools. We also are joined by our middle school principal, Mrs. Jill Barker, who handles our school that serves our grades 6 through 8 students. And we're joined by Mr. Harkin, who is the high school principal at the Columbia High School. And he is joining us again on the panel. Joining the team tonight is Paul Bickle. Paul Bickle is our Director of Facilities. We were having a little bit of problem making sure Paul could hear us, but I think because of the wave, now I know that Paul can hear us. Paul, can you hear us?
I can. I'm good to go.
Excellent. So we are good to go, and we welcome everybody to this evening's meeting. And we want to start by just giving you a quick update and a reminder. Last Friday, through our school messenger system, which includes an email, we sent to all of our parents an enrollment selection form. That enrollment selection form is critically important to our district as we plan to reopen in September, so that we know the number of students and the names of the students at each level who will be participating in our proposed hybrid plan, as well as our children who will be participating in our full remote option. So if you have not had a chance yet to review that enrollment form and complete it, it is due back to the district by this Friday, August 21st. In the event that we do not receive your enrollment selection form, we will schedule your children into the hybrid model that we have proposed, which would include the blending of in-person learning 2 days a week, the virtual live Wednesday instruction, and remote projects and assignments. As of this point, the district has received 1,869 responses through the enrollment form process. Approximately 78% of the families have elected to participate in the district's proposed hybrid model, and approximately 22% of our families are selecting the full remote. That information is critically important so that we can get you your child's AB schedule, and also more information for our full remote parents on the scheduling of those students into that option. Critically important that we get that by Friday. So just as a reminder, check your emails. I believe it is also might be available on the website, but I'm not sure of that. In the event that you do have a problem, you can email my office or you can email the general email to the board, and we will make sure that you get a copy of the link. Without further ado, I'm going to turn the program over to the question and answer session, which will be facilitated by Mr. Adam as he engages us in the thought exchange. And again, the first question will be directly related to elementary families. So we're asking, for the purposes of managing and being responsive to all of your questions, that those that choose to respond to the first segment be only those parents that have children at the elementary school level. And we appreciate your support and cooperation. Mr. Adam.
Thank you, Mr. Simons. I'm going to share my screen. Mr. Simons, it says you have disabled participant screen sharing. Can you give me access to that?
I'm going to need Mr. Goodwin to help me with that. I will try.
All right, I'm the host now. Thank you.
Very good.
All right. Does everyone see the thought exchange screen with the purple bar? All right. So as Mr. Simon said, tonight we're going to be using our crowdsourcing platform called Thought Exchange to gather your input on our preliminary reopening plan. We have the same question, but we will be giving it at 3 different points in the night. As Mr. Simon said, the first one will be for elementary, the second one will be for the middle school parents, and the third one will be for high school. And the question is, as we approach the reopening of our schools, what are your key concerns and questions? So to participate, you will go to tejoin.com and then type in that 9-digit code. I'll leave this screen up for a minute just so everyone can jump into the thought exchange. Once you're in, there will be 3 steps. The first one is share, where you get to share your thoughts, your questions, your concerns. And then the star step, where you will rank other people's thoughts and questions. And then discover, where we will all get to see the top ranked thoughts and questions and concerns. And we will throw that to our panel to answer the most top of mind concerns. I'm going to start the timer here to get your questions in. Again, to join, you'll just go to tejoin.com and then type in this 9-digit code. Got about a minute and a half left to get your questions in. Don't forget to rank other people's questions and concerns on a 1 to 5 scale. Try and use a variance of those stars so that we get the best results possible. All right, time is up. So let's get into our question and answer session. And the top question here, will we be notified if there is a positive case in the school, our child's class, or on the bus?
The answer to that question is yes, you will be notified. The nurse of the school, in coordination with the administrator of the school, will follow all procedures in the event that a child is demonstrating a symptom of COVID-19, which would include isolating that student, asking the parent to come and pick up the child. The child would go home, and the parent would be directed to consult with the child's primary care provider. In the event that that consultation indicates that the doctor and or the parent is going forward with a request to do a test, that child would have to quarantine until such time as the test results come back. The county Department of Health would be involved in that matter because we would be notifying the county Department of Health. And once we have spoken to the county Department of Health that we do have a positive case, we would inform our parents. We would not be able to reveal the identity of the child, but we would reveal to all of the affected parents of a particular school, and most likely all of the parents in the district, that we do have a confirmed positive case. And based on the steps that the county Department of Health directs the district to implement, we will advise you of the steps that we are taking in coordination with the Department of Health. You will be notified. There is a process in place for us to communicate on a regular basis with the Department of Health. And there is a meeting set up with our nurses towards the end of this month so that all the districts are following consistent procedures regarding handling of students that have symptoms and the process to return to school.
Will the start time be moved back at all as extra time is needed to clean buses in between runs?
At this point, based on the reduced ridership on our buses, again, we have approximately 22 students on a 66-passenger bus. We believe that the procedures that we have in place to drop students off in the morning, to clean the buses, and to complete the next run, for example, we bring our students to the high school earliest in the morning. We believe that those procedures would take approximately, once the students have exited the bus and the temperature checks are taken, the process would take an additional 10 minutes or so. So we don't anticipate large changes or fluctuations in the announced start times for our schools. There may be within the first week or two of school an adjustment which would indicate that buses may be slightly late due to those procedures. That is typical of the first couple of weeks of school anyways, but we don't anticipate changes in the start times. under the current hybrid. It would only be a matter of getting used to the procedures as we implement them during the first couple weeks of school.
Can you go into more detail as to what the remote learning days will look like?
Yes, we're going to address this question specific to the elementary level. I know that Mr. McHugh, our Assistant Superintendent for Instruction, and our principals have been working with elementary teachers on what remote learning days will look like. In fact, we had approximately 20 very enthusiastic teachers here last week developing a schedule and some examples. So I'm going to turn this question over to Mr. McHugh.
Our K-5 teachers, a group of 18 teachers, worked through this plan of what K-5 would look like for remote instruction. So when we're talking about the remote instruction days that are built within the hybrid plan, for example, an A student is in person on Monday, they are remote on Tuesday. That would be a consistent approach at every grade level, but what that would be is that we've addressed it a few times, that those in-person days, you're maximizing that in-person contact time with your students. You're really working through that time where you're teacher modeling and you're providing some guided practice and setting students up to apply that knowledge and apply those skills independently. So that's where they would engage in activities that we're applying that higher level thinking skills, where students were applying what was taught during that remote time. So it would still be New York State standards-based instruction. It would be a mix of both paper and digital resources and materials. But consistently, what we work through is really a template of what that would look like at each grade level. What was appropriate? What was the amount of time that students should be spending? For example, our K2, the expectation was that it would be at least somewhere between 45 and 60 minutes of actual practice, where once we get into grades 3 through 5, that rigor increases and we're looking at somewhere between 60 and 90 minutes. We want to make sure that whatever's being done on those remote days does not present itself as just simply homework. So of course, there will be homework. There's always homework that's associated to in-person instruction, but we want to make sure that the remote instruction is not representative of just purely homework, that it's really purposeful and targeted.
Thank you, Mr. McHugh.
If hybrid classes get shut down, how will that affect remote learners?
In general, in the event if the classes are shut down due to concerns regarding COVID, all affected students would be shifted to remote learning. So in the event that the regional indicators required the region to shut down the district or all districts, everyone would be shifted to full remote. The full remote option is a blending of different options that include different ways to staff it. But in general, everyone would go on full remote. In the event that a particular class was shut down or a particular class was awaiting the results of a test and the county told us that we needed to shut the class down or quarantine the class, we would make arrangements to shift that class to remote, and the communication regarding how that would occur and how those classes would connect would come likely from the child's regular teacher. So there's a difference in the entire district being closed down, and we have to shift everybody to full remote. Our hybrid plan enables us to be able to do that smoothly. If a particular class or a particular school were closed as we were responding to a positive case, then those teachers generally that were teaching in person would be teaching, and those students that were receiving instruction in person would be receiving that instruction remotely, similar to what they would experience on a virtual Wednesday.
does the Wednesday live virtual day look like at the elementary school level?
This is a perfect opportunity for Mr. McHugh to come back on. Mr. McHugh, after you explain it, I think I do have the ability to put up the slide that will be presented tomorrow to our parents. So why don't you talk about it a little bit, and then I'll try to get the slide up so teachers have a better idea, parents have a better idea of what the teachers have scheduled for virtual live Wednesday.
So we recognize that this is uniquely challenging, especially for our K-5 population. We just think of what's developmentally appropriate in regards to what we expect from our young learners. For example, a high school student could follow their schedule. They have the ability to log on using technology and follow their normal schedule. But it's totally unrealistic to think that a kindergartner through, especially at least through third grade, that a student can log on and stay engaged from the start of the school day until the end of the school day. We also recognize that we serve a very diverse public, and that there are unique situations where our children could be in a situation where they're really not able to log on without that adult support, and that adult support is not available during the time when that online live virtual instruction would be provided. So we wanted to make sure at the K-5 level that it was a blend of synchronous and asynchronous opportunities, meaning that there is a general consistent block of time. For example, in K2 that you're looking at right now, there's core instruction that could be given between 9 and 11 a.m. And if you look to the right, it describes what that core content instruction could be. It could be whole group, small group. It could be some time where there's some independent learning. However, we realize that not every student, K2, can log on during that time. So there'll be some recordings. So if mom and dad are not home during that time, and the student, the 5-year-old or 6-year-old or 7-year-old student is being watched by an older sibling or somebody that can't provide that academic support, that asynchronous opportunity will be there, which is flexible, so that a family could adjust accordingly and access that lesson, access that instruction at a time that may be more convenient for them. So they have dinner, they do what they need to do in the evening, and they have that time to sit down in the evening to click on and see that lesson and complete that work, that those opportunities are provided. Again, within that live virtual, what you do see is some consistent office hours. We want to make sure that our teachers are available to our students and available to our parents. If there are any questions, there are scheduled office hours where teachers would be available to respond accordingly and provide that extra assistance if need be. We're going to focus on the core. We're going to focus on the ELA and the math, but there's going to be cross-curricular activities where we can integrate the science and we can integrate the social studies into that core instruction.
I would also like to note that you can see in the framework key, we talked about the importance of our staff not only being available for office hours to our parents, but the fact that we are providing teaching assistant support to our child care centers. There will be an opportunity under that area of connecting to make sure that during that time that the child care centers have the ability to connect with our teachers, so that our teaching assistants or other staff who are working with kids on remote work on virtual live Wednesdays during the child care would have an opportunity to ask questions of our teachers as well. So the family connection piece, the office hour piece, and the fact that we have a set schedule and a framework at the K-5 level will enable those office hours, but also enable, as Mr. McHugh said, families who are working to have recorded information that they can revisit at a time more convenient to them. So, Mr. Adam.
All right, just reshare my screen. Okay. How many teachers are returning versus remote from within our district? And I guess along those lines, a question we've been seeing also is, will the full remote students have district teachers?
The question regarding how many teachers are returning versus requesting remote assignments, we're still working through that process through our Director of Human Resources. It's approximately 14 total teachers right now that vary by level. So it's not necessarily 14 elementary teachers. It's approximately 3 or 4 based on my recollection of the data. The teachers who are assigned to full remote students, if I understand the basis of the question correctly, would not necessarily be teachers from the same home school and not necessarily district teachers. However, our first priority would be to schedule students who need full remote classes to teachers who need full remote assignments. Secondly, we would look at the number of children who are assigned to remote in any given school. We would make adjustments to the number of in-person sections, and we would be assigning teachers from the school to classes of remote students. So one of the reasons why we really need that information to come to us on Friday is in order to staff the full remote classes for our students, particularly at the elementary level, we need to have a full accounting of the number of students, what grade levels those students are in, so that we can establish classes and assign teachers. The first assignments would be made to our teachers who want full remote at that level. There are approximately 4 or 5. And then we would look to teachers who were currently planned for in-person learning, adjust those classes in ways that would enable us to assign those teachers as well. So they will be generally district teachers first. Secondly, we would consider options that may involve sharing with other districts through Questar. Specifically, that answer is specifically to the elementary level.
What type of absences will require doctor's notes for return to school, and what impact will this have on siblings if a brother or sister is homesick?
I have to make a distinction in answering this. When you ask if what would be the process to return a child who's homesick, the answer is it depends. Are they sick with normal sickness? For example, they have not tested positive for COVID, but they have other symptoms such as a stomach ache. Okay, we know that there are a range of types of instances and illnesses where kids get sick. It doesn't necessarily mean that they have COVID-19. That's why we encourage our parents to consult with their primary care provider. And in instances where there is a suspicion of COVID-19, the Department of Health would be involved. Typically, absences require a doctor's note to have those absences marked as legal absences. That process would not change unless somebody is homesick because they've had a positive COVID-19 result. They would have to be released through a letter provided by the County Department of Health, which the family would be provided to give to the school, and there would be assurances provided. Brother and sister, if the brother and sister is not sick and not in a home where a child or a family member is suspected of having COVID-19, they can come to school. If they are under a quarantine because the family decided to travel to a state which was currently on New York State's list, the family would be subject to the same quarantine, and which would include the entire family.
Mr. Simon, if I could chime in just for one moment.
Yep.
We're really encouraging our message to be a healthy school starts at home. And we're really asking our parents to be our partners in screening their children daily before they come to school, because they know their children best on what's a typical scratchy throat because they have allergies or a headache. So we're really asking our parents to be partners and start the screenings at home.
Very good. Thank you, Ms. McGrath.
Could you please require students to wear masks during instruction?
We are. Students are required to wear masks during instruction. The district is required to provide mask breaks. Those mask breaks will occur during instruction, but they will be limited in duration, and they will be standardized at the high school level, middle school level, and the elementary school level. So we are requiring students to wear masks during instruction. And they will be given short breaks that are consistent across classrooms at the elementary school level and when they're eating or drinking during lunch, for example.
Will specials, art, music, etc., still take place as per usual schedule, and will the children stay in their classroom or go to those rooms?
The art, music, physical education, library schedules at the elementary school level have been being worked on. In fact, the teachers were in today working on those options. We plan to post further information about those tomorrow. They will not take place under the usual schedule, however, because we're not following the usual master schedule. We are following a hybrid model, but they will be provided at the elementary school level. The teachers will generally rotate to the classrooms when delivering that instruction in person, on in-person days. Mr. McHugh, do you have anything to add?
The only piece that I would add is, you know, in the K-5 world, you know, you could be an A student, meaning that you attend school for in-person instruction on a Monday and Thursday, and you may have art on your schedule for Tuesday. So without trying to adjust that special schedule, there are cases where a child may never see that special area teacher. So our K-5 principals have worked really, really hard to create a different type of schedule for our specials, where our special area teachers in essence may function on a 6-day schedule, so that students are guaranteed to see each of their special area teachers throughout whatever time period we are in that hybrid delivery. So in essence, that your Tuesday special won't always stay the same, so you won't be missing that same special. But our K-5 special area teachers worked hard today to develop a plan of what that would look like, what the instruction would look like in person, what the expectation would be for students when they are remote, and what the expectation would be when it's a live virtual Wednesday. And we'll share that information as soon as possible.
Could you please discuss what recess will look like for children? Will they be distanced?
Okay, I'm going to kick this question over to Mr. Grignon from Janae. Mr. Grignon, you want to talk a little bit about recess? I think we'll give each elementary principal a shot at this one.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Simons. Through conversations that we've had as a K-5 team, we are looking at recess where we will be putting kids into a rotation model where they would be able to utilize the playground. They would be able to utilize fields or any available space that would be at the various elementary schools. At Janae specifically, we have 2 courtyards. We have the soccer and lacrosse fields, and we also have the playground that we will be utilizing and putting our students in our classrooms into a rotational basis weekly, where every child will have an opportunity to play in each of those pre-designed areas. During recess, students will be required to wear masks while they're playing outside. Students will, and then our monitors outside will do the supervision piece of our students to limit contact as best as possible as students are playing outside in our recess areas.
Okay, I'm going to give Mrs. Squilacci this question as well. Mrs. Squilacci, anything to add?
I think Mr. Grignon hit the main points. I think the idea is to have students have an opportunity to play on the playground equipment, though we want to limit the mixing of cohort groups as much as we possibly can. So we would have a rotational schedule of who is allowed the equipment and who's scheduled to play on the field, or maybe some jump rope games and those kind of things. So we'll have lots of different opportunities for our students, and we'll limit the cohort groups being mixed.
Thank you, Mrs. Scalacci. Mr. Alvey, anything to add at DPS?
They hit the nail on the head with that. We're all on the same page in terms of how we're going to roll out our recess.
Thank you. I want to add to this just a little bit. Going back to the date at which the New York State indicators permitted the capital region to be in phase 4, we've had children engaging in outdoor activities, both on our district property, as well as within childcare programs. And so the social distancing, the wearing of masks, the hand sanitation, all of the procedures that have been followed over the summer to enable the families to have their kids participate in some of the recreational activities, for example, baseball, softball, camp type programs. Those kids have been interacting in a similar manner to what they would be doing on the playground. But in accordance with our guidance, we would be having them wear the masks. For example, we are operating a child care program currently at Janae, and we have had no health issues through GCC.
Mr. Simons, how about one more question in the elementary section here?
Sure.
Will there be morning program or morning announcements in the schools? And if so, will remote learners be able to participate?
It's a really good question. I don't see any reason why we couldn't figure out how to allow remote learners to participate in that with a little coordination. It may not be able to start that right in September, but as far as morning program operating within the schools or that morning celebration, that's important to help the kids feel connected and to start the day off right. Mr. Alvey, will you take this one?
Sure. We had a lot of great practice with this, from March on. I can speak for DPS. This background right here was the location for many morning announcements from March to June, where I utilized Google Classroom to do our traditional morning announcements. Based on, with the timing of getting kids off the bus, I think, we will evolve. There are many things that we've learned through this process that are great practices. And so I see those things continuing on as we hit September. I think our morning announcements and, whether people utilize a morning news, a TV studio, I think, all of us are on the same page in continuing that with the idea of having kids social distance, physical distance, but also, putting together some content regarding our procedures, having the kids involved in as much of what we're trying to accomplish for their health and safety and learning. It's going to be a huge part, and I think a big part of the learning process and helping us get back together to who we are as a school community.
Thank you, Mr. Alvey. So let's make a transition to middle school. Mr. Adam?
All right. Okay. So again, this is a new thought exchange, but it is the same question. It's just geared towards our middle school students and families. As we approach the reopening of our schools, what are your key concerns and questions as it relates to Goff Middle School? So to join the thought exchange, you'll just visit tejoin.com and then type in the 9-digit code that you see here on the screen. Once you've joined, you can start to enter your thoughts, questions, or concerns. And then once you've done that, you can start to rate other people's thoughts. I'll leave this screen up here for just a minute so folks can join. Just about a minute left here to get your questions in. And don't forget to rate other people's questions and thoughts so we can move on to the next stage. All right, let's start with the questions and throw it to our panel. Lunch, are the lunch tables still the round ones? How will children be seated for lunch? Mr. Simons, you're still muted.
Mrs. Barker, I know she has the answer to this one. In fact, we showed a picture at the last meeting. So Mrs. Barker, we're going to kick this one off to you.
Okay, unfortunately, we were not unable to keep the round tables due to the fact that we weren't able to socially distance 6 feet apart our students. So what we have done in the cafeteria is we have placed individual desks in the cafeteria that have been placed 6 feet apart, and students will be select their seat, so they'll be able to be near a friend, but they won't be sitting, they'll be sitting 6 feet apart, but they'll still have the opportunity to be around their friends. Prior to entering the cafeteria, they'll have the opportunity to use hand sanitizer, and when exiting the cafeteria, they will also be using hand sanitizer. So, as far as lines are concerned and going to get their food in line, they're going to be tape on the floor, and students will be standing in line 6 feet apart. So we will be using individual desks and socially and physically distanced in our cafeteria.
Thank you, Mrs. Barker.
Will the teacher for the remote students be live for the duration of the class?
I'm interpreting this question to mean the full remote students. In general, at the middle school and the high school level, students and teachers will follow the period-by-period schedule. In some cases, that period-by-period schedule may be modified slightly due to the fact that the number of minutes might be adjusted to be a little bit less than would be typical because of the nature of the virtual live engagement. Additionally, we are working through some discussions to see what we can do to provide follow-up support for our students in addition to that live instruction as part of the remote program. But in general, middle school and high school will follow a period-by-period schedule. It will be modified slightly because of the nature of the remote instruction, and we're working through that schedule, and we hope to be able to announce the finalized schedule within the next 7 to 10 days. But it's a period-by-period model, primarily virtual live instruction, and we're working to try to find ways to provide individual and or group support for kids who may not, who may need it.
Will students be expected to log into each class separately? How will attendance be taken on the 3 days they are at home?
Okay, I'm going to steer this question to both Mr. McHugh and Mrs. Barker. The question basically relates to how are we going to track attendance when the kids are on their remote days? Mr. McHugh?
So the first part of it, they will log into each class separately. So when they are live virtual like on a Wednesday, they'll do it period by period, and attendance will be taken period by period. Attendance on the days that they're at home, on virtual Wednesdays, they're either in that class, so the expectation is students in grades 6 through 12 follow their academic schedule, and our teachers are following their schedule. So attendance is easy on the live virtual Wednesdays, either they're logged in or they're absent. On the days that they're remote, that is part of that lesson design that we talk about, that the content's the same, it's still standards-based instruction, but the way that content is delivered has to change in the hybrid model. So students will be set up, or they'll have that modeling, the teacher modeling, they'll have the guided practice, and then on the days that they're remote, that's when they're engaging in some sort of independent activity. When they submit that work, whatever's assigned, if it's project-based learning, whatever is assigned, that's how attendance will be taken on the days that they're remote.
So, Mr. McHugh, just to clarify, on remote days, not virtual live Wednesdays, does the time that the student submits the work, is that a factor? So if a student doesn't submit their work at 8:30 in the morning, does that matter? And I would clarify, a teacher still has the right to set a due date for work, but it doesn't necessarily mean it has to occur at a particular time.
That's correct. So we've had a lot of discussion about that. So it's unreasonable to think that our teachers are going to be on until 11:59 p.m. to see if the work comes in. Our Power School, our student information system, allows our teachers to go back 3 days and be able to change any record. So whether it's attendance, they can change that, because we always have that flexibility, right? In a non-COVID-19 pandemic time period, we always have extenuating circumstances, right? Students need differentiation. There are things that happen in every student's life that through that communication and even those office hours where a child may need an extended time period in order to complete something. Maybe they need that additional support and things are modified. So it's unreasonable on the other side of that to think that a student, if they're in, say, their fourth period around 10:30, 11 o'clock in the morning, that they're able to submit that work on that remote day during that time. So that's an unreasonable expectation from both sides. So there is that flexibility that any time during that remote day, those assignments can be turned in.
And if I could just add to that, should the student engage in the work that was assigned to them on the remote day, our expectations are that they would log on at some point to complete that work on that given day, and having given that, they would be marked as present. If they were not to log on a remote day and not submit any work, then we would assume the student was absent that day. Not to say that they couldn't make up that work, but there would be some communication from that student with the teacher as to why they might have not been able to submit the work on that particular day. and there'd be some flexibility demonstrated, but in order to keep routine and good habits in place, we would look for the students to engage in the activities on the remote days within that school day timeframe, if at all possible.
Thank you, Mrs. Barker and Mr. McHugh.
Will class start and end times be adjusted for one-way traffic and changing of classes?
This question relates to potentially staggering classes so that as kids are transitioning from room to room to take different courses, are they going to follow specific traffic patterns within the school to reduce or minimize contact? Mrs. Barker?
The school start time and end times will not be adjusted. However, we do anticipate homeroom lasting a little bit longer than usual due to the fact that we have 33 buses that will be pulling in to Goff on every day, and we do need to take temperatures of each student coming off of those buses. And we do have a number, because it's half the school building, we anticipate that we'll get better at it and we'll get faster at it, and kids will be able to get into the school quicker and once we establish that routine. But initially, I anticipate that our homerooms will be a little bit longer than normal, and that as far as when classes are ending, we do anticipate doing a staggered release. So for instance, if it's a sixth grade class, we would dismiss half the class 1 minute before the end of the period and then dismiss the other half so that we don't have all students in the hallway at one time. And then we would flip that. So say it was A through M on Monday where they would release a minute early, then we'd let them N through Z go first on the Thursday they were in. So we're trying to create equity in terms of staggering release times. We are looking to reduce the amount of kids in the hallway at any given time. And then we will have one directional flow of traffic as well, up the staircases and down the staircases.
Thank you, Ms. Barker.
Will there be opportunities for kids to wash their hands during the day? Time between classes is typically short.
I'm going to put this one back to Mrs. Barker. Obviously, we are generally encouraging kids to wash their hands with soap and water as frequently as they can.
We do encourage hand washing, obviously, as much as possible. However, we still have we do need to make sure that the number of students in our restrooms are limited. So our plan is right now for our occupancy in our restrooms to be 2 students at a time. We are purchasing the occupied and vacant signs for outside the door. So as students come into the building, we'll tell them that when they go into the bathroom, they would flip over occupied, and then a second student come to be occupied, and then we would know that at this point in time, no more students can enter that restroom. So we are going to try to teach kids to manage the bathroom time, and also teachers as well, to make sure that we're not letting too many kids be in the bathroom at a time, which will have presence in the hallway with staff, and also the signage should help us manage how many kids are in a bathroom. But certainly, if a kid feels like they need to wash their hands and we want to encourage that as much as possible.
Thank you, Mrs. Barker.
Mrs. Barker, just to follow up on that, will there be procedures for going to lunch in terms of washing hands or hand sanitizer?
We will have hand sanitizer available, and we would encourage every student to use it prior to, as they enter into the cafeteria and also exiting the cafeteria. A child can also go to the restroom from the cafeteria. We have bathrooms close by. And again, we would monitor the amount of kids who were able to leave the cafeteria at any one time, just to manage the number of kids in the restroom. But certainly when they are going into the cafeteria and exiting cafeteria, we want them to be sanitizing their hands.
When will schedules be sent out?
We're anticipating sending schedules out. First of all, you'll get your grouping, A cohort, B cohort. I believe we're going to be doing it the week of August 24th. Is that correct, Mr. Simons?
Yes, it may be towards the end of the week. Again, the urgency is to get the enrollment request forms in this week. It may be more towards the end of that week, but it will be the week of the 24th, more likely closer to the 28th.
And as far as the individual schedules, they would come after that point, and we are looking to get them out as soon after as possible once we're able to establish staffing with remote students and staffing to accommodate all of the individual staffing needs that we have.
For full remote learners, will they have live instruction 5 days a week? If not, how many live instruction days? And will teachers be available on those non-live days?
In general, full remote students will have live instruction 5 days a week. We are working on office hour concepts and other concepts to ensure that there could be follow-up support for the students. All teachers are expected to be available through email or through some other means to communicate with parents or students who have problems. So the traditional methods to contact a teacher would still be in place. If you're in a remote, if you're in the remote model, the best way, I think, to handle that would be to email the teacher. And we would anticipate that you would get a response to that. Additionally, in that email, if some arrangement needed to be made to have a phone conversation, we could do that. And we are working at an office hour concept that could also support students and families who need extra assistance.
If a student is quarantined or has a positive COVID test, could you switch to remote learning? How would that process work?
If an individual student is identified as a positive case, has a positive case of COVID or quarantined, during the quarantining process, while awaiting a test, we would provide tutoring. Okay, similar to what we do now. So the quarantining process could last anywhere between 5 and 14 days, depending on the number of tests. So while awaiting that test, we would provide a level of tutoring. In the event that that individual student is has COVID-19 and will be absent for a protracted period of time, then we would make a shift to that student to remote learning, and we would assign that student to a remote learning teacher.
Will students have to have their temperature taken outside, even if it is pouring, lightning, negative temperatures?
Well, I'm going to go back to Ms. McGrath's point earlier. We are really relying on the parents to do the health screening every morning and the temperature checks. The temperature checks that we are going to conduct on site are additional security for our district and for our families. So in the event that it is raining, there may be circumstances in which kids are proceeding through a line and getting a little wet as their temperature is being taken. Certainly, if there is lightning or thunder, we would not permit students to be out in the thunder and the lightning, no different than we wouldn't during a sports practice. And we would make adjustments to the procedures to be able to ensure appropriate shelter for the kids. The temperature check requirement is written that the district is responsible for ensuring that the parents do the health screening and the temperature checks. So again, we're relying on the parents to be the first line of defense, so to speak, regarding temperature checks and screenings every morning.
What will gym be like at the middle school level?
Phys ed teachers met today. Mr. McHugh facilitated their discussions. I'm going to have Mr. McHugh and Mrs. Barker talk about this, starting with Mr. McHugh.
Talked a lot about maximizing the ability to go outside. So, you know, we're fortunate for the fall that, you know, the weather lends itself to be able to bring classes outside and use that outside space. However, we know that in the Northeast, the weather can change on a dime, so we need that backup plan as well. And we really spent a lot of time talking about what type of activities could be conducted in physical education class, maintaining all of the social distancing and safety requirements. So that range of activities really range from simple walking to yoga. And what we did do was we created a grading rubric. So for grades 6 through 12, we created a rubric on how students would be evaluated and graded. We also created an activity log that students could complete for the days that they were scheduled for physical education, but they might be remote on that particular day. So we are hopeful to have that information available for all of our special areas: physical education, art, music, and library. We hope to have that posted and available for our parents and students on our website by the end of this week.
Thank you, Mr. McHugh. Mrs. Barker, anything to add?
I think Mr. McHugh covered it all. It's in line with in the plan that we have in the building, and certainly, hopefully, we can be outside as much as possible. But if they are required to come inside, again, they'll just do low aerobic activities.
Thank you.
With masks.
Let's do a couple more questions and then move on to high school. Will there ever be snow days, or will they become remote learning days for everyone?
There will be some instances, depending on the number of snow days we use and what kind of winter we have, whereby students will be asked to do remote learning assignments during snow days. The hybrid model that we're implementing enables the district to have a little more flexibility in its calendar. So there will be instances in which we will be communicating that in-person learning is canceled because of weather, but we want the students to engage online and complete remote assignments.
If students won't have lockers, what will they do with their winter coats? Will they be expected to carry textbooks all day?
In the case of both the middle school and the high school, we've been discussing lockers. We are indicating that we prefer not to use the lockers at both levels. The procedures for winter coats and textbooks, I think we're still ironing out some of that stuff. I would anticipate fewer need to carry textbooks back and forth because of the online remote component, providing a lot of the information through that resource that wouldn't require as much reliance on bringing the textbooks back and forth. Mrs. Barker?
Yeah, exactly, Mr. Simons. Because much of the work that we do now is through Google Classroom using our Chromebooks, there's very little use for textbooks in school. We do have the opportunity to send textbooks home when they first come to school, and that textbook can stay at home. But we are also looking at the supply list and looking at whether or not what we have listed on the website is appropriate. So we are going to be looking to possibly do some revisions and pare down some of the things that we'd expect, like, for instance, 3-ring binders, the necessity of really having those so that the students have less to carry around from class to class.
Thank you, Mrs. Barker.
All right, let's move on to the high school Q&A. So this will be a new thought exchange. It's the same question, but focused on Columbia High School. As we approach the reopening of our schools, what are your key concerns and questions for Columbia High School? Again, you'll join by going to tejoin.com and then typing in this 9-digit code. Once you've joined, you can begin to enter your questions or concerns, and then move on to the second phase and begin rating other people's questions and concerns. I'll leave this screen up here for another minute so folks can join. Right, our time is up, but you can still continue to pose your questions or concerns. We'll toss this to the panel now. How will labs be conducted for chemistry and other classes, similar classes?
Okay, I'm very encouraged that this was the top question. I know that there is a high emphasis on achievement within our district, and we want the kids to be successfully exploring math and science. So I really think that this rising to the top is a really great reflection on our parents and on our students and on our school system's culture. Mr. Harkin, I know that you have plans for labs and other science courses. Can you talk about those, please?
Yes, we are in the process of purchasing an app called Gizmo, which will allow us to do most of our labs virtually. It'll be almost like you're doing the hands-on lesson in your lab yourself, but it will be in the virtual world so that we're not sharing instruments and stuff like that. And we will do some limited labs that we can complete in the building during the lab time. So we look forward to using Gizmo in a combination of in-person lab.
Thank you, Mr. Harkin.
Should we expect that a child will be online for 9 full periods on the virtual day?
Overall, the answer is yes. However, it will not necessarily be 9 full periods. It depends on the number of courses that the students take in a typical 8 or 9 period day. The schedule will likely on virtual days start later than it would on AB days. We're still working through that time frame, but it would be anticipated that the school would start a little bit later in terms of when the student would be expected to engage online for first period. But it will not necessarily be 9 classes. It'll be the number of classes that the student is taking and likely a shortened schedule that will start later. Mr. McHugh?
In reference to a 9-period day, the middle school operates on a 9-period day. Columbia High School operates on an 8-period day. So again, it's really driven by the student's current schedule. So we do have students that take advantage of a full 8-period schedule. That does not happen a lot. It doesn't happen with the majority of our students, but we are looking at a modified instructional day for all of our virtual days. We realize that keep students engaged in an online format of an instructional period that for the high school is typically 45 minutes is going to be a challenge. So we are working through that currently, and we hope to share that information quite soon.
How will exams and grading be conducted this year?
I would, before I steer this question to Mr. Harkin and Mr. McHugh, I would encourage parents to look at the preliminary reopening plan. There is a section of that plan that is dedicated to the assessments as well as grading practices, which would be consistent with our current policies. And the exams overall and the grading overall would be pretty similar to what it already is in the event that we were in a full in-person learning mode, although the delivery of those exams and grading might vary slightly. Mr. McHugh?
So we did address this within our initial hybrid plan, but in regards to exams and gradings, when you're talking about exams, we haven't heard any different news from the New York State Education Department, whether or not the Regents exams, if there was going to be any pullback or change like there was last spring. So we are planning that those exams will take place. Our full grading policy is in effect. We have a lot of teachers having a lot of professional dialogue about alternate assessment and authentic assessment, meaning that there's a lot of discussion regarding academic integrity. If ever we were forced to go into a full remote instructional plan, then, what does that grading look like? And, it's not just paper and pen kind of assessment, but it could be more outcome-based, more project-based, more of a portfolio or a body of work. You're looking for students to apply the knowledge that they've learned, and that can be done in a variety of means. It doesn't have to always be through a pen and paper assessment, but there's a lot of discussion even on what those Wednesdays would look like. If some one-to-one assessment could be done during some of those days as well. There's a lot being discussed and talked about, but our grading policy as currently in place will remain in effect. We heard a lot of feedback from the spring, and we learned a lot of lessons from the spring. We want our students to stay engaged and committed and stay motivated, so those grading policies are in place.
Thank you, Mr. McHugh. Mr. Harkin, anything to add on exams and grading?
No, we're just about the same thing that Mr. McHugh said. We're looking at alternative forms of assessment, and we understand that students talk and they communicate digitally in this day and age. So an exam we give on a Monday may not be valid on Tuesday. So we're looking at, like he said, alternative ways to examine that our students are gaining the information that they need.
Thank you.
What was the outcome of the Saturday morning superintendent's conference call after Ballston Spa decided to go full remote?
I was not a participant in that conference call. I was not expected to be a participant in that conference call. That conference call was for the Capital Region BOCES component districts, the districts that are part of that particular BOCES. East Greenbush is part of the Questar BOCES, so I wasn't invited and I didn't participate, and I wasn't expected to participate in that. We did have discussions within the Questar BOCES districts on Monday, and during those discussions, districts determined that we would continue to follow our own plans for reopening, and that those plans range from different forms of hybrid options to different balances of in-person learning versus remote learning versus virtual live instruction. So we are not part of the Cap Region BOCES. We were not involved in those discussions and determinations that were made by Ballston Spa. We are part of the Suburban Council, and I do meet with the Ballston Spa superintendent and the other superintendents in the Suburban Council. And as I've indicated before, we all have different considerations and challenges regarding reopen, and Ballston Spa made determination that based on their challenges and constraints that they were going to have remote learning for the first approximate month of school. We made a decision here in the Questar BOCES to respect our each individual district's differences in the way that they need to respond to their boards of education and their parents and their students.
Mr. Simons, I haven't seen the question yet tonight about air quality and ventilation, but I thought since we have our director of facilities here, perhaps we could discuss air quality as an issue as it relates to students and staff being back in schools and
Sure.
what we've been doing in that area.
Very good. So Mr. Bickle is here with us. He's our director of facilities. He and I, a few weeks ago, asked Train Corporation, who handles our heating and ventilation system controls and other issues related to our HVAC, to do a comprehensive indoor air quality review of our systems. We received the preliminary report of information today, which is being finalized, indicating some steps that we could take to enhance the level of fresh air being brought into the school, as well as address any issues related to making sure that the circulation of air, poor air to the outside of the school and bringing in the fresh air could be done to maximize the level of fresh air within the building. So Mr. Bickle, want to talk about that?
Thank you, Mr. Simons. Yes, as Mr. Simons said, we enlisted the help of Train because this is a very complicated situation. We're very fortunate to have trained systems in place that actually, where we can control the systems directly from a computer. So having this in place, it made this assessment a little bit easier. They were able to dig through. They have access and controls in all of our HVAC equipment throughout all the 7 schools in the district. Using this, they were able to gather a bunch of information. The biggest thing that I noticed, the biggest takeaway, I guess I would say, is they wanted to increase the amount of fresh air intake, like you said. To do that, you have to increase the exhaust fans. So we're going to be working with Train to produce a program that can be put in place temporarily, at least during the pandemic, that'll allow the exhaust fans and the air dampers throughout the district to open to 100%. Typically, they're usually around 20% or so, and it varies greatly depending on the room. But in this case, we're going to focus more on fresh air intake rather than the balance between fresh air intake and losing air that you just conditioned or heated air out of these exhausts. So the district's prepared to put this in place. Like I said, we're working with Train to get that program written. And once that's in place, what's going to happen is first thing in the morning, early on, there's going to be a time when all the exhaust fans, all the fresh air intakes go to high speed. That'll flush all the air that's in the building, the stagnant air, out. And it will then slowly work its way back down just before the start of school so that the temperature in the buildings can be brought to the appropriate temperature, especially during the heating season. So when that happens, we're going to, during the day, we're going to have the air dampers open a little bit more than we normally would. So you may notice, if you're in the schools or your students are in the schools, you may notice a negative air pressure, things like you might notice at home where a door either wants to stay open or shut because of that pressure. We're willing to take that as a trade-off at this time to make sure that we're filtering that air through as much as possible. And then once again, at the end of the day, we're going to ramp up, after all the students leave, we're going to ramp those systems up again to flush that stagnant air out so it's out of the buildings overnight. That's the main thing that we're going to focus on. It's the most bang for your buck from our perspective. Other things will be focusing on air filters throughout the district. And there's been a lot of talk of increasing the MERV rating on air filters. This is a great option to have. The only issue is it can cause issues with premature failure of equipment. So to combat that, we're going to focus a lot more on selected areas that have newer equipment and equipment that can hold up to those type of filters. So we're working with Train to actually go through our buildings internally, have their technicians visit rooms that have been pointed out by staff, and focus on those particular rooms as far as increasing the MERV ratings. We want to take a well-balanced approach to this, and those are the best things we can focus on at this point. Other things that we are also looking into is purchasing large commercial air purifiers for certain rooms that'll handle a certain amount of square footage. Probably spaces that are larger than classrooms. Most classrooms range from 700 to 900 square feet. These will be focused in areas like guidance rooms, cafeterias, rooms like that of larger size. So that's kind of our preliminary takeaway from the report, and I'm going to continue to work with Train and work through some other hurdles we have just to get through the start of school. And from that point, I think we're going to be in good shape. Like I said, we're really fortunate to have these systems in place. They were never intended to function the way that we're going to ask them to function, but we do have that ability, which is a very nice thing. So I'm very thankful that we have that in place.
Thank you, Mr. Bickle. Appreciate the thorough response.
Yep.
So before we move to another question, I saw the question regarding whether or not and how the desks would be cleaned in between classes. Again, we will be cleaning the desks in between classes. We are working with our employee unions to determine the specific ways that will be done. We are identifying the products that would be the best to utilize, and we're continuing those discussions. But there will be a procedure in place to clean the desks in the event that groups of students are moving out of those classes and changing classes, and we're having different groups of students. But the procedure is not finalized yet. We're still discussing the most efficient and the best way to do that. And we hope to be able to share the specific procedures with you between now and the next couple of weeks.
Students with a 504 plan, is there any kind of support in place for older kids who are home alone learning virtually?
This particular issue relates to, in general, the ability of the district to continue to work to try to provide some office hour support for students, particularly at the high school, middle school level, but at all levels, so that we would have, in addition to live instruction for the entire group of students in a class, we would have the ability for students and families to connect to a teacher to help with extra support. Additionally, in accordance with the 504 plan of the student, we would be obligated to provide any accommodations that are required of that 504 plan. And I'll ask Ms. McGrath to discuss how the 504 plans would be monitored and implemented in the varying contexts of our instructional models, which would be virtually, remotely, and in person. Ms. McGrath?
Thank you, Mr. Simons. You said it well that all 504 plans will be implemented regardless if a student is fully remote or hybrid. We encourage anyone, not just a student with a 504 plan who needs support, to reach out to their school counselor. We have a guidance department, 6 through 12, and they're available. They're the case managers for our students with 504s, and they work closely with the teachers to make sure that the accommodations are implemented and that they're implemented well and effective. So reach out at any time if a student is struggling.
Thank you, Ms. McGrath.
A question about parent drop-off and traffic. How would that procedure work with buses and student drivers and parent drop-offs?
Okay, it is very important in general for parents and or student drivers to follow the procedures that we establish and communicate. Those procedures would include the staging of busing students to the school and dropping off busing students and the staging of parent drop-off. So I'm going to ask Mr. Harkin to detail that a little bit, but it will be different than what you're used to, with traffic backed up on the street as coming to because there are half the students coming for in-person learning on any given day, and B, because the staging of the busing and the parent drop-off will occur at different announced times. Mr. Harkin?
Right, that's correct. So we anticipate, like our last year, we'll have a 6:50 to 7:10. We'll have all the buses come in between that 20-minute period and drop off all our busing students. We'll make use of our 3 entrances to get the students in as quickly as possible once they're screened for their temperature. And then from 7:10 to 7:25, we encourage our drivers as well as our parents to drop off. And we will make use of 3 different areas for drop-offs, and they'll be detailed in the letter There'll be the main loop, there'll be the lower loop in the student parking lot, and the upper loop located by the faculty entrance. We're also going to be opening parking to all eligible juniors and seniors free of charge this year, and information will be coming out next week. So any student that has a driver's license and insurance and is eligible to drive and their parents allow them, we're going to encourage them to drive as well to reduce the number of students on the bus.
Thank you, Mr. Harkin.
How will full remote kids transition back to on-site learning?
For the initial decisions that are made regarding whether or not students are participating in the hybrid or participating in the full remote option, the ability to change that option will not occur until about a 10-week period. So that selection process is critically important because it will occur virtually for the first marking period. We will have to monitor a number of different factors to determine whether or not or when students might be able to be increased for in-person learning. The first factor would be what's happening with COVID-19 confirmed cases and infection rates within the capital region. The governor has indicated as recently as a couple of days ago that the state could shut down districts. So monitoring that infection rate, if it stays stabilized generally in our region, there could potentially be some further guidance that comes from the State Education Department and Department of Health, which would enable changes that would enable the district to increase the number of students that come in for in-person learning on any given day. We don't know that that will occur, but we are hopeful. The other important part of transitioning back into in-person learning is that the quality of the curriculum, whether a student is in a full remote option or in the hybrid, that quality of the curriculum will be similar based on New York State standards, ensuring that the expectations for each grade level and or course are similar, that the support is provided to ensure that students have the best chance of success regardless of what model they're involved in. And so that should make the transition go fairly smoothly because of the comparability of the two programs. Additionally, there is a plan in general to transition all of our students back successfully through the work of our counselors and our social workers, and that same process of engagement with our children and our families would occur as we transition students from the full remote to the in-person as we move forward and we continue to monitor the COVID-19 situation. So we have an engagement process that works for everyone, and we will continue that process as we acclimate students to come back to in-person learning.
All right, Mr. Simons, it's after 8 o'clock. You want to do one more question?
Sure.
Will there be any after-school clubs?
In general, the answer is yes. Extracurricular activities, including clubs, will still be provided. We'll be working with our club advisors to determine how those clubs could be offered to students engaged in in-person learning on days when they're in person or through virtual options, which were provided last spring. And in accordance with New York State requirements, full remote instruction students are permitted to be participants in extracurricular activities, and we would work to provide extracurricular engagement for the students on the full remote model, which is required of New York State.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Simons.
So I guess I would ask if any members of our panel have any closing comments or different responses to any of the parents' questions, and then I'll do a wrap up. Mr. McHugh, anything? Ms. McGrath? Mr. Alvey?
Sure, I'll break the ice, Mr. Simons. No, I just want to thank our community for their participation. We do appreciate all the input. One of the things that's come up, and I've received emails, and I know my colleagues have, and we've seen through Thought Exchange over the first few get-togethers, really about the masks. And when we think about our young kids at the elementary level, one thing that you can do for us at home is to help build their stamina in wearing the masks. So anything that you can do to help support us with that transition would be greatly appreciated. Make it a fun game to help build it. Whether it starts at 2 minutes, to build it to 5, to get it to 10. Those will be things that we'll have to work on at school as well, and then include those breaks. But anything that you can do at home to help us with that, we would greatly appreciate as we tackle this new endeavor together. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Alvey. Mrs. Squatch, anything?
Yeah, I would just like to say that all of our staff are really looking forward to welcoming the students back in the fall. They've been in working on their classrooms, and they're really excited to have students back in person. And we will do our absolute best to make sure everybody stays safe and healthy, and we have a great start up to our school year.
Thank you, Mrs. Squatchy. Mr. Grignon?
No, I think Mr. Alvey and Mrs. Scotchy nailed it on the head. But in regards to what Mr. Alvey said, one thing that, just as a suggestion, we're doing with our kids at home is we're building that stamina with wearing masks by rewarding them with screen time. So they wear it for a certain amount of time, then our kids can play with their iPads or some other device that they're really interested in. I've got twins that are 2.5 at home, so they're starting to learn that process. So just something to think about. And again, we want to thank the community for all your wonderful support and your questions and engaging us over these past few weeks as we build the plan together to support our communities, our schools, and most importantly, our staff and students.
Thank you, Mr. Grignon. Mrs. Barker?
Thank you, Mr. Simons. I would just like to let the incoming sixth graders, the parents, I know that there's some anxiety for many of our students coming into middle school because we did not have the opportunity to do the tours that we normally do and have parent orientation. So I do know that there's a lot of questions and there's a lot of emotions out there in terms of students coming into middle school for the first time. So I did want to let parents know that Ms. Hoffman and Mr. Newman and I are working on a plan to have a slow introduction for our incoming sixth graders for the first couple of days, where we'd actually have an opportunity to do some form of an orientation to get them more comfortable with the building and how the building operates. In addition to that, we also are looking at providing some type of video that we could share with incoming sixth graders and their parents so that the students could see how the process will be when they enter the building. So we have some stuff we're working on, and we hope to have that out to parents within the next couple of weeks, obviously prior to the 14th, where students will be entering our building at that time.
Thank you, Mrs. Barker. Mr. Harkin?
Thank you. We also are looking at trying to do a freshman orientation. We're finalizing the details right now and going over that at the district level. And we're hoping to do that on August 27th, which is a week from Thursday. And again, like Mrs. Barker just mentioned, we're working on planning a video to show all our students how they'll move around the building, what the new expectations will be while they're in the building. And like everyone else, we're excited to have the students back. And I want to thank all the parents for their cooperation and understanding while we're going through this difficult time.
Thank you, Mr. Harkin. Mr. Bickle, anything? Mr. Goodwin, you've been operating the technology behind the scenes. Anything to add regarding technology?
No, thank you very much. I'm good.
Okay. I think, Mr. Adam, any final words?
Oh, I'm good. Thank you.
Okay. So in closing, again, I want to thank all of you for engaging in this. I do recognize the challenges for families in relationship to trying to understand, process all this information. Some reluctancy in making decisions regarding your children are going to come in person and engage in our hybrid program. There are still some reservations about what the right thing to do is. We respect that. We understand the fears and concerns regarding safety that everyone is experiencing, not only our families, our students, our staff. We experience them as well. We've tried to put together what we believe to be the best quality and safest plan that we can offer East Greenbush students. But with that, there will be delays in some cases in decisions that we're not comfortable with or used to. For example, here it is August 18th. We're getting questions about supplies lists and when schedules will be provided and all of those things that typically we would be able to say it's coming next week or it's coming in a couple of days. This has been an evolving process because of the guidance and also the requirements are difficult for school districts to implement. We think we're pretty close. And that enrollment survey is critically important. I would love to say that on Friday, we received that survey from every single parent. So if you know another parent, if you know another person who hasn't gotten that survey in, we really need that. We need that to expedite this process as best we can to give you your assignments for your children and to fully complete the scheduling of the full remote model for those families. So we understand the concerns out there. We understand that the stress level is high. But as everybody on this panel has said, we are really looking forward to the beginning of the school year. This is something that we've missed the kids. We have missed the kids since March. And our efforts to provide in-person learning and the option for the full remote are driven by one thing. We want those kids back. We want them to succeed. We want them to do well. We want to work with you to make this model, with all of its difficulties, with all of its constraints, work as best we can for the entire community, because it really is about making sure that we can serve the children. So thank you very much for engaging with us this evening. There will be another opportunity at the board meeting tomorrow night during the public forum. That opportunity will be a little bit different, as you can submit questions through a dedicated email, but we're encouraging everybody to work with us to make this the best experience that it can for your children. And have a good evening.